Hey, welcome back to The Pen is Mightier. We last left off talking about Burn Like Cold Iron, a Lord of the Rings fanfiction. And now we're picking up with Chapter 5, Friends in Low Places, and I will start us off for this episode. All right. Chapter 5, Friends in Low Places. I opened my eyes groggily and squeezed them shut again when my head started to spin. Where was I? The ceiling above me was unrecognizable. The bed in my apartment wasn't this scratchy and thin, surely. My whole body ached too, as though I'd tumbled down a flight of stairs. What had happened to me? With an enormous effort, I sat up and looked around, hoping to make sense of things. I was in a prison cell. Melodramatic, yes, but there was nothing else it could be. The bed I'd been lying on was more of a lumpy pile of straw, held together by a mildewing mattress that looked like it had been chewed on by something. My violin case was on the stone floor next to the bed, and a small tin bucket rested in the corner. But other than that, the cell was empty. A heavy wooden door stood at the far end of the room, and I walked up to it. Untangling pieces of straw from my hair, the door was locked, unsurprisingly, but there wasn't even a handle on my side. So it wasn't a dream, I said numbly. My words came out in that strange other language I had spoken the night before, and my breath hitched. It wasn't a dream. I wondered if I should pinch myself, just in case. My body already ached so much, I decided it wasn't necessary. I was kidnapped, I said out loud, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I was kidnapped, and now I'm locked in a medieval-looking prison cell. I had to say these words out loud just to assure myself it was real. It seemed unbelievable that less than a day ago I'd been at work, sneaking onto Facebook when my boss wasn't looking, then meeting up with my friends and practicing my violin. Fighting the urge to scream, or maybe vomit, I turned to the window above the bed. It was too high to see much out of, but I stood on my violin case, jumped, and managed to grab onto one of the Windows bars and pull myself up high enough to peer out. Mountains. So, I hadn't imagined that either. With a wince, I dropped back down to the floor and put my head in my hands. I've been kidnapped and I'm locked in a prison cell. And I'm in middle. I choked on the words. It wasn't true. Of course it wasn't true. What was wrong with me? Even saying it out loud seemed ridiculous. No, sooner or later, I'd find out what was really going on and make it back home. And after all, I'd been missing for a while now. My friends must have called the police and when I hadn't shown up at the bar for our gig. Was there a team of investigators looking for me? I imagined them breaking down the door of my apartment. Maybe they would find a lone, sorry. Sorry, I lost my plan.
Oh, that's right. By the way, he didn't introduce me. Thanks a lot, Brandon. But I'm your co-host this episode, Aaron, and I'm here too. Sorry, just keep going.
In fairness, this is just a continuation, but
Oh, that's true.
Yes.
They should probably have
Yes.
Okay, maybe I just sounded stupid then. Right, just keep going.
Maybe they would find a long white hair on the carpet, and they'd be able to track Saruman down. I laughed hollowly. It seemed impossible that they'd have his DNA or fingerprints on file or anything, but you never knew. I imagined myself pointing at the wizard in a police lineup. That's him, officer, the one with the beard and the cloak. I laughed again, louder this time, on the verge of hysteria. Panic was threatening to overwhelm me. No, I had to keep my head. There had to be something constructive I could do. I dug through my violin case. My phone was still there. The case had cracked from where Saruman had thrown it onto the floor last night. Still no bars. I waved it around desperately, trying to find a signal, but I wasn't really surprised anymore when it didn't work. I opened the camera on my phone and used it as a mirror, rubbing out some of the dirt and dried blood on my face with a sigh. I looked absolutely horrible. My nose was swollen and deeply bruised, and yesterday's mascara was smeared, raccoon-like, under my eyes. Looking good, B, I muttered. Suddenly, my cell door unlocked with a thunk. I scrabbled to my feet as the door creaked open. A young man stood there, looking for all the world like he'd just come from a Renaissance fair. Um, he wore a threadbare tunic, some kind of thick brown leggings, and muddy boots. A long knife was strapped to his hip. He looked like he hadn't bathed in weeks, and his long, stringy black hair fell into his thin, sunburned face. I backed away from the door. "Who are you?" A servant of Saruman," he muttered, his eyes trained on his boots. I winced. His teeth looked like as though he'd never been to a dentist in his life. I've brought you your food, miss." I hesitated. He certainly looked crazy with the whole medieval getup, but he couldn't be completely insane, could he? "Hey, you don't believe in all this, right?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. Maybe, just maybe, this guy could help me. "You don't believe this whole, Middle Earth thing, do you?" I do not understand," the man said, sounding weary. He still refused to meet my eyes, looking instead at a place on the floor. Just take your food, miss." He tried to shove this tray of food into my hands, clearly wanting to leave as quickly as possible. "Wait, hold up," I crossed my arms, not wanting to miss my opportunity. "Just tell me, where are we? I mean, where are we really?" He hesitated, now staring determinedly at the ceiling. "I do not understand," he repeated, his voice shaking. Surely the wizard has told you that you were in Isengard." I wanted to scream. No, no, no! I don't care what he says we are. I want the truth. I know Isengard isn't a real place. You know it's not a real place. And you know that man isn't a wizard. He can't be. Can't you just please start making sense? The man shook his head, looking baffled. I took a deep breath, clenching my fist. I didn't want him to see how close to tears I was. How could he have the same exact delusions as my kidnapper? "Look, let's just try again, okay? We'll start simple. My name is Beatrice Smith, and I'm from Dallas. Now then, what about you?" The man's hands were shaking now. He looked positively terrified. "My name is Einar, miss. I hailed from Dunland." "Where's Dunland?" Please be somewhere in Texas or something. Please. "Just to the north, miss. West of the Misty Mountains." Einar was frowning now, as though insulted that I hadn't heard of the place. I sighed in frustration and decided to give it one last shot. "Look, Einar, please. I need to get out of here. I've been kidnapped and I'm really far away from home. Can't you help me out? Do you, I don't know, have a cell phone I can use? Mine doesn't have any bars and it's running out of battery." I held up my phone to show him. Einar leapt back as though burned, yelping something in a language I didn't understand. He made a strange, zigzagging movement with his hands over his forehead, like he was warding off an evil spirit. I stared at him in bewilderment. "Your food, miss," he stammered, pressing the tray into my hand so hastily that the cup of water splashed onto my shirt. Wait! I exclaimed, sensing that he was about to lock the door and run off. "What's wrong with you? What are you scared of?" "Please, miss," Einar said, backing out of the room and staring fixedly at my shoes. "Do not put a curse on me or my family. I want nothing to do with you or your sorcery." I nearly dropped the tray of food. "Sorcery?" I repeated furiously. "Sorcery? I did not mean to anger you, miss. Forgive me." The rest of his stammering words were cut off as he slammed the door behind him. I was left alone once again. I heard his hurrying footsteps retreat down the hall. He was afraid of me the whole time, I thought, stunned. I looked at the tray of food in my hands numbly. A tin cup of water, excuse me, I'm reading too fast. A tin cup of water, a hard roll of bread, and a lump of vegetables and unidentifiable meat. Prison food. I burst into tears. Really, I didn't care about the prison food. Einar could have brought me all-you-can-eat barbecue and I wouldn't have cared. But I couldn't believe that he was just as crazy as Saruman. How could that be possible? There had to be some kind of explanation, something, anything. I think, come on. With a shuddering breath, I sat down on the floor and did what I always did when I was in over my head. I started taking notes. Digging through my violin case, I dug out a pen and using the back of some sheet music began writing. Things to figure out, I headed the paper. There, nice and simple, where am I? Was the subheading. Mountains, forests, plus cold, not Texas. How did Saruman get me here? Drugs? I sighed. Maybe this was hopeless. I felt stupid writing all this down too. I plowed on anyway, speaking a different language, writing in a different language. Mental problems. Kidnapper made me answer questions yesterday. I couldn't think straight. Hypnosis? Prison guard, just as insane as kidnapper. Acts like he's never seen a phone before. Thinks I'm from another world. Cult member? Saruman's stolen weapons. Electronics. Books. Plotting terrorism? I shuddered at the memory of the night before. Stockpiles of explosives shadowed in torchlight, and the wizard staring hungrily at his collection as I pointed out the various gears and mechanisms of the vehicles he'd stolen. I shook my head, pressing my fist into my eyes. I've never been more so afraid in my life as I'd been last night. It was horrible. All of those weapons still sitting in the storerooms, and none of it made sense. None of it. Writing all of this down was a stupid idea, I decided. I'd hoped that getting it all down on paper would make it seem less ridiculous. Maybe I would see a pattern in everything that I hadn't noticed before, and suddenly I'd make sense of everything that was happening. But instead, all I decided was that it made even less sense now than it did before. Solution number 1, you're hallucinating. I wrote, the pen shaking in my hand. Number 2, you've been drugged. Number 3, you're a contestant on the world's worst new reality show. I laughed hollowly, tears streaming down my face. Now, I didn't believe any of those explanations. Not even for a minute. This was all too vivid, too painful, too detailed. Whatever was happening, it wasn't staged, and it wasn't all in my head, which left, you're really in middle. I stopped. I couldn't do it. I couldn't write it down. I just couldn't. With a scream of helpless panic, I crumpled the paper up and threw it across the room. The rest of the day passed slowly. I barely moved from my spot on the floor. I picked half-heartedly at my prison food, blanching at the taste. I typed up text messages for my mom, for Nathan, Caroline, John, and pressed send even though I knew they wouldn't go through. I scrolled through my music, listlessly tapping my foot against the stone floor to the melodies and watching as the sun slowly sank beneath mountains on the horizon. Suddenly, I heard my door unlock again. Einar? I sat up. The door opened just a crack, and Einar's face came into view, eyes downcast. He was looking pale. He was pale and shaking. I have more food for you, miss. But please, cease your spell casting before I enter. He was still staring at the ground. What? What are you talking about? He pointed with a trembling hand at the bed. My phone was sitting there. Music was still playing from the speakers. That unearthly noise. It is not natural. It's Tartini's violin sonata in G minor. I care not what you call it, but please, just cease it at once. Fine, I snapped, turning the music off. I wasn't in the mood for his strange behavior. No more unearthly noises. It's safe to come in. The man let out a shaky breath and entered the room. Your incantations were lovely, miss, Einar said carefully, his voice trembling worse than ever. I meant no offense. It's all good, I muttered. I never got the hang of that piece myself. It's famously impossible to play. God, I miss my violin. I ran a hand through my rat's nest of hair. I mean it. I've practiced every day without fail for 5 years, and now I can't. All because I set my violin down on my stupid couch instead of putting it back in my case before I got kidnapped, I sighed, seeing the bewilderment on Einar's face, and rambled on regardless. I actually kind of like the idea of being stuck in a cell in a tower playing the violin. It'd be like a fairy tale, I went on, cracking a small smile. Ideally, I'd be wearing a flowing dress or something, with the wind blowing through my hair, something more princessly than this. You know what I mean? I can't say that I do, miss, Einar mumbled, looking bemused. He held a torch in his hand, and the shadows playing across his face made him look even younger than before. I wondered what such a young guy, even one as poorly dressed and dirty as him, was doing working for a man like Saruman. He handed me a tray of food, identical to my previous one. Thank you, I said again. I was worried I'd only get one meal a day here. You're supposed to, Einar said awkwardly, now staring determinedly at his shoes. I just thought, well, even sorceresses need to eat, miss, don't they? And one plate will hardly go amiss in the kitchen. I blinked in surprise. Oh, well, gosh, thanks, Einar. The poor guy looked even more terrified than before and made a dismissive noise in his throat as he hurried towards the door. Wait, I stopped him. Look, man, while you're here, I need to use the bathroom. You wish to take a bath? No, I exclaimed. I need a pee, Einar. Can you take me to a toilet? He raised an eyebrow in a surprise, eyes flicking to the bucket in the corner of the cell. I stared at him. What? Oh no. No way in hell. The bucket? I said despairingly.
Yeah, that word is pronounced desperately, Brandon.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Desperately. I can't believe I missed that.
I'm never gonna let you whip it.
You want me to do my business in a bucket? Einar's face went slightly red as he backed out of the cell. Good night, miss. Oh, come on. The door slammed shut, cutting me off. I sighed as I heard the lock thunk loudly into place. Well, that's just great. I approached the bucket like a prisoner, heading to the gallows. Be strong, B. I cringed. This was so humiliating. There wasn't even toilet paper. I steeled myself and managed to do my business without making too much of a mess, cursing Saruman and Einar and Isengard all the while. When I was done, I sat down on the straw bed and cried into my tray of food. It started slowly enough, just a few self-pitying tears rolling down my face, but soon I was sobbing uncontrollably, my whole body shaking helplessly as I took in everything that had happened to me. I want to go home, I sobbed, burying my face in my hands, and flinching when my palm pressed against the bruises and cuts of my face. I curled up into a pathetic ball on the bed, crying in the dark until I could barely breathe. Maybe somehow things would make sense tomorrow.
Cool.
Desperately.
That is the end of chapter 5. Do you want to present your thoughts?
Honestly, I think that this one, once again, was really good at characterization. I think that it really helped to kind of add more to the story. I'm really interested by this Einar character. I have no idea if he exists in Lord of the Rings, but I don't know. It was just really interesting seeing the whole thing kind of play out. So yeah.
I actually have to disagree with you. I don't really like this chapter. I think it's too cliche. The way they interact with each other, and she I'm pretty sure this is her 7th or 8th time just breaking down into terrified tears, which I can understand 4 or 5 times, but after a certain point I'm pretty sure denial wears off and kind of the fight for your life begins. And I don't think the author is doing a very great job of portraying something that's deep here. I think it's straight up just, something terrible happens to this main character, and the dialogue is good. It's made well, but it's very quickly playing into a very cliched kind of feel. I don't know if you got that. Maybe that's just me.
I understand where you're coming from. I think the thing is that it's a little bit different because I think this situation is a little bit kind of complex. I mean, obviously, I don't know how I would react to it. I'd probably react the same way that she is.
No, I don't think you would cry as much. I think both of us would only cry max 5 times.
I think I would cry in the sense that I don't know where I am. I don't know what has happened to my friends and family. I don't know if they've been hurt. I don't know if, I'm going to die. I think all of those thoughts running through my head. I can understand why she's crying, but I think it's also kind of and you have to look at it from her perspective as well. She is operating on a very little information at this point because she doesn't really know why she's there. Even though, she knows why. She knows where she is, but she doesn't want to come to grips with it. So I guess that's a little bit different. But
maybe she just has a different coping method than us. Because I know I know for me, I would probably just go insane. I would probably just start making stupid jokes out of everything or something. I don't know, because I feel humor is my kind of method to panic turns to humor for me. But I mean, I guess it still feels kind of unrealistic because of the way they portrayed the character in the prologue, where she was like very quick to like very curious and very quick to accept something. But I mean, I guess she was a kid. But she's like, she isn't portrayed as someone who's very
she isn't
weak.
a kid. That's the thing. She isn't a kid. She's like in her 20s, I think. So
yeah, she isn't portrayed as someone who would cry this much, which is what I'm saying. Is that it's just kind of weird and kind of awkward to like just have her cry 20 times per chapter. But anyway, I should move on to the next chapter before we start rambling.
Yes.
Title 6 is called Title Drop. Very interesting title for the chapter. I'm gonna drink some water and get into my reading voice, because you guys know it takes me some time. All right, it's the crack in my water bottle.
Opening of it.
All right, I'm ready. You gotta tell me, Brandon, if I have some like voice, like volume variations, because I'm not very good at staying at a constant distance from my microphone, so I might just like fade in and out. You just gotta tell me. Okay. All right, chapter 6, title drop. Tomorrow came last, but things still didn't make sense. Frankly, I was starting to think that things might never make sense again. I slept fitfully into the early afternoon. Between the ominous sounds of construction outside my window and the screaming of crows flying around the tower all night, I was ready to rip my hair out in exhausted frustration. I grabbed my phone with a lethargic hand. 6% battery left, still no bars. I took a deep breath. After spending most of yesterday sobbing uncontrollably, I'd made a pact with myself. I wouldn't cry again, not a single tear, until I made it back home. After all, I cried more in the last 2 days than I had in the past 2 years put together. It had to stop. With a now familiar thunk of the lock, the cell door opened. Morning, I muttered as Einar... Oh, that's probably not the right tone, but... Morning, I muttered as Einar appeared in the doorway. But it's afternoon now, miss. Einar glanced up at me briefly, before looking quickly back down at the ground. Your food, he offered, handing me a tray with the same stale bread, mushy vegetables, and unidentifiable meat as yesterday. And the wizard is occupied, I believe, with other matters today. He expects a guest to Isengard soon, I've heard, and is making preparations. Perhaps you will continue your work with him after his guest departs. Oh, great. I swallowed heavily. Thanks, Einar. In all my panic at being locked up and possibly being a make-believe book universe, I winced as I realized how ridiculous that sounded. I'd almost forgotten that Saruman said he'd be coming back to continue his interrogation. Numbly, I watched my guard clear away the empty food trays from yesterday, and I winced in sympathy as he replaced my pee bucket with an empty one. I bet Saruman isn't paying you enough to do his job. Or do this job, I muttered sourly. Einar didn't respond, but the corners of his mouth twitched upwards briefly as he left the room, and it occurred to me that, against all odds, I might have made a friend here. The day passed even more slowly than yesterday, if that were possible. So far, I had succeeded in my not crying pact, but without an outlet for my panic, I was at my wit's end. I paced back and forth across my cell like a caged animal, pulling at my tangled hair and biting at my nails until I nearly drew blood. I was going to lose my mind in this cell, if I hadn't lost it already. The shadows lengthened on the walls. The battery on my phone eked away to 3% as I listened to more of my music to pass the time. And despite myself, my thoughts kept drifting to the book I had tucked away in my violin case. I'd been trying to ignore it. Why feed the insane thoughts drifting through my mind after all? But I couldn't stop wondering if maybe I could help. Wow, I'm really bad at English today, but I couldn't stop wondering if maybe it could help me figure out what was going on. It was early in the evening when I finally gave in to my curiosity. Bracing myself, I opened my case and pulled out Nathan's copy of the Fellowship of the Ring. My hands shook as I examined it in the gold evening light. The book was hardback but small, like the pocket Bible my mom used to carry around, and it was clearly very well loved. The edges were frayed and deep cracks had formed in the book's spine. I studied the image on the cover of the book for a long moment. 9 silhouetted figures walking along a path, one leading a pony, one with an axe, one with a bow and quiver slung over his back, one leading the group wearing a pointed hat and carrying a staff like Saruman's. This was the Fellowship, I knew that much. I flipped the book over. No imaginary world has been projected which which is at once so multifarious and so true, I read aloud. It was a quote from C.S. Lewis, emblazoned in gold letters. The words sent a chill down my spine. Even C.S. Lewis is going on about how real this book is, I thought impatiently. What is wrong with everyone? Here are beauties which pierce like swords, or burn like cold iron. Heyo! It's the title, everyone! Sorry, I ruined everyone's immersion just because I was excited. I opened the book hesitantly, irrationally afraid of what I might find, and flipped through the pages until I found a map of Middle-earth. I sucked in my breath sharply. Isengard, I read, seeing a tiny tower marked on the page, nestled between a huge mountain range and a forest. And there's Dunland, I noticed, to the north, just like Einar said. I stared at the mountains on the map, my blood feeling cold and thin in my veins. Standing up shakily, I looked back and forth from the map in the book to the mountains out my window, panic building up in my chest until I thought I might burst. Were the mountains in the same place out my window as on the map? I couldn't tell, but it certainly looked like it. So what did that mean? Did that mean... I nearly jumped out of my skin as the cell door unlocked. I whirled around, my heart pounding painfully. Geez, Einar, you scared me, I gasped. But it wasn't Einar in the doorway. Another man stood there, dressed in the same Renaissance fair hobo style I was getting accustomed to. Who are you? I asked hesitantly, hiding the book behind my back hastily. I'm scrolling for the readers. That's why I'm pausing. And then I lost... Oh, Tarbin, son of Felman, the man said carelessly, as though pleasantries like that were a waste of his time. He stepped into the cell, holding up a lit torch in the twilight, analyzing me closely. Tarbin looked directly at me as he spoke, clearly unafraid of me the way Einar was. He looked just as unkempt and dirty as Einar, but bigger, broader, and at least 10 years older, with leathery-looking skin and a wiry beard. Something unpleasant shone in his eyes too, and I stepped back. But maybe it was just the lengthening shadows and my heightened paranoia making him look so creepy, I thought. So, are you from Dunland too? I asked him, trying and failing to sound lighthearted. Aye. Tarbin stepped closer. I stepped back. What are you doing here? Where's Einar? I came to see if the rumors were true about the sorceress and the wizard collected from a far-off land. He sneered. They seem to have been greatly exaggerated. I crossed my arms, prickling at the word collected, but not wanting to make him mad. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you then, I said blandly, but it seemed that Tarbin wasn't finished. After all the rumors I've heard, all the efforts the wizard's gone through, this is it? The man slurred, staring at me accusingly, and I wondered suspiciously if he was drunk. After all, I've heard tell Saruman has a flying machine stored away from your world. This ugly, scrawny thing is all he's brought back? Flying machine? I repeated, confused. You mean the helicopter? The man shrugged in response, taking a steady step towards me. I swallowed. While you're here, though, I have a question for you, I added, hoping to distract him. I didn't like the look on his face, predatory and mocking. Can you just explain to me in very, very clear terms where I am? This might be my last chance, I thought wildly. I was grasping at straws now, I knew, but I had to be sure. Tarbin raised a bushy eyebrow and folded his arms. What do you mean? You're in a cell in Isengard. Should I give Tarbin like a slurred, like an accent? Should I do accents basically?
Yes.
Okay, I'll do an accent. What?
But don't expect me to do accents.
Well, but then that just okay. I'll do a slight accent. It won't be. Yeah, I'll just do something slight. My eyes narrowed and I opened the map in my book again. And where is Isengard? Geographically, I mean. He looked at me as though I had been dropped on my head as a baby. North of the Rittermark and south of Dunland in the Misty Mountains. It borders the forest of Fangorn and lies along the river Isen. He snorted impatiently. A child would know this. But I wasn't paying attention to him anymore. I was studying the book, tracing my hand over the black lines of the map. They were all there. Fangorn, the river Isen, the Misty Mountains. Everything was just like Tarbin said. Suddenly, the book was wrenched from my hands. Hey! What do you have there, sorceress? Tarbin examined the book in the torchlight. He pulled out a page curiously, as though he'd never seen paper before, and the map tore free from the book with a horrible ripping noise. Stop it! I exclaimed. What'd you do that for? That's my friend's book. I scooped up the fallen page in my hands. Nathan would be furious. I've never seen a book like this, Tarbin observed. Witchcraft from your homeland, I imagine. He tossed it onto the floor with unease in his eyes, as though he'd been handling a live snake. I clutched the torn page in my hand so hard it started to crumple. I should have known that this man would be just as crazy as Einar or Saruman. In utter desperation, with my last dying ember of hope, I tried one last time. Have you ever heard of Texas? Tarbin looked at me as though I was crazy. Maybe I was. Texas? No. The United States of America? No. I'm growing tired of these questions. What about a story called The Lord of the Rings? Have you ever heard of a man called Tolkien? What about, without warning, Tarbin struck me across the face. I like to imagine it's the exact same spot where Saruman hit her. And every time throughout this entire fanfic, she just keeps getting hit, but always in the same place. Like maybe it's like a running gag. Sorry. Interrupting again. That's enough nonsense. Women like you shouldn't speak unless spoken to. And that's Tarbin speaking, not me. Please don't cancel me. I staggered back, tears of shock welling in my eyes. I tasted blood on my lip. You say we're all in Middle-earth? I yelled, backing a good distance away from Tarbin. I was shaking from head to toe and wondered briefly if I was gonna vomit. Well, I don't think much of y'all's manners in Middle-earth, asshole. Oh man, you got him. Suddenly, Tarbin was only inches away from my face, and the smell of horses and alcohol was strong enough to make me gag. So he'd been drinking then. My heart sank even as my blood turned to ice. He grabbed me at the juncture between my shoulder and neck, his thumb pressing against my windpipe. I strained away from him, struggling to breathe. Tarbin! The man whirled to face the cell door and sneered. Einar stood there, pale and homeless looking as ever, a torch in one hand and a small tray of food in the other. Evening, Einar, Tarbin said casually, and I managed to wrench myself away from him, gasping for breath and shaking. Come to see our friend? Einar stepped back nervously, looking at the floor. No, I only... Frightened of your own shadow you are, the man laughed. Am I giving him like an Irish accent? I can't tell because my headphones.
I can't even... I think it does kind of sound a little bit
I'm trying to give him like a little bit of a Northern European, like a Northern UK, Ireland, Scottish kind of thing. Gotcha. So I'm glad you got Ireland from that. I keep interrupting. I'm sorry. Frightened of your own shadow you are, the man laughed. You know, the White Wizard will not want you to lay a hand on her, Einar managed, his voice strained as he set down the tray of food on the ground. Despite myself, I felt a sudden pang of affection for the poor guy. You know, he spent years inventing a spell just to bring her here. Tarbin jutted out his chin. For a moment I thought he might hit Einar, but he just snorted and spat on the ground between them. Aye, you're right, he conceded, looking thoughtful. The wizard's gone half mad spying on this other world. Exactly, Einar said, looking relieved, but Tarbin wasn't done yet. All those years the wizard spent studying his little scrying glass, sending things there and bringing things here, and for all his efforts he winds up with that scrawny thing. He sneered, sending a mocking look my way. I don't know why he's even kept her alive, he added. If I were the wizard, I'd have thrown her to the orcs without a second glance, sorceress or no. He laughed at the horror on my face, but something he said gave me pause. Wait, I exclaimed, what do you mean he sent things there? Saruman sent things from here to my... Tarbin's fist connected with my jaw for the second time, and stars exploded behind my eyes. Man, he's really punchy.
The violence, I know,
yeah,
the violence.
He's got catch these fists kind of attitude. I told you not to speak unless spoken to. Tarbin, Einar protested weakly, eyes darting between us. You're right, Einar, Tarbin sneered as he advanced towards me, his hand grabbing my throat again. The wizard worked far too hard to end up with this scrawny, nosy little sorceress. If a sorceress she really is, he would probably reward me for ridding him of a burden such as her. He pulled me closer, and I jerked my knee upwards the way I'd seen women do in the movies, making satisfying contact. Tarbin released his grip on my neck, but swung the torch in his other hand at me so close that the heat seared at my face as I leapt back. With a snarl, the man lunged at me, eyes burning in the torchlight. Some instinct told me to use my phone, and without thinking, I grabbed it from my pocket, brandishing it in front of me like a weapon. I thought for sure Tarbin would laugh at me again, but instead he faltered, staring at the white light of my phone's screen as though mesmerized, suspicion in his beady eyes. Quickly, I opened my music and pressed play. The third movement of Mahler's Resurrection Symphony shattered the silence of the cell. What is that, an incantation of some kind? Tarbin snarled. By some miracle, he was backing away now, the blood draining from his leathery face. Stop it! Both Tarbin and Einar looked uneasy, clammy, as though I was truly putting a spell on them. They had never heard a symphony before, I realized. The truth was clear on their stunned faces. They had never even conceived of such sounds, let alone that that noise might come out of a little device like the one in my hand. Seizing my chance, I turned up the volume as high as it would go, the strings and percussions and brass rising in a wild, bombastic crescendo, so dramatic that the unease on the men's faces was transforming into terror. I would have laughed at the way their jaws dropped, but my heart seemed to have lodged itself somewhere in my throat. Without another word, Einar fled into the hall, beckoning the other man to follow, and I felt a twinge of guilt at the fear in his eyes. Tarbin hesitated. He jerked forward as if to knock the phone out of my hand, then seemed to think better of it, clapped his hands over his ears, and ran after his companion. Einar gave me one last frightened look, and I slammed the cell door shut behind them. I didn't move for a long time after they'd gone. My whole body was numb. I stood motionless in the dark, my heartbeat drowning out the symphony still blaring from my phone. Finally, my body came back to life. I hugged my arms to my chest, rubbing at my neck and face as though trying to scrub away the feeling of Tarbin's grasping hands on my skin. I couldn't believe that he had threatened and hit me like that, or that had managed to scare him away, at least for the present. And I couldn't believe that after all this, everyone in this tower still held that we were in Middle-earth, that the Lord of the Rings was true. I couldn't believe it. I just wouldn't. Middle-earth wasn't real. It was the product of an old professor's imagination. It was fiction. Magic and wizards and dragons and things I'd stopped believing in decades ago. I stood there, trembling, thinking about all the things I'd learned since arriving here, and I finally broke my promise to myself. Oh, and let out a sob of despair. I believe that actually does mark the 20th time. I was joking earlier. The book had been right, hadn't it? The map was accurate, and then there was that quote on the back, the quote that made my blood freeze and my breath catch in my chest. I buried my face in my hands. No, don't cry, but it was all real. How could it be real? It's true, isn't it? I breathed, and saying it out loud made me more certain than ever. Oh God, it can't be. Abruptly, the music stopped. No! I jabbed at the home button on my phone, but it was too late. The light on the screen went out, throwing the entire room into darkness. The battery had run out at last, and with it went all my connections to my friends and family, to my whole world, and now, God, I was entirely alone. I sank to the ground, feeling further from home than I'd ever been in my life. I was afraid then in the pitch black, the all-consuming silence of my cell, afraid in a way I'd never been before. I was lost, utterly and terribly lost, immeasurably far from home, and I could see no way of getting back. And in the absolute isolation closing in around me in the dark, I knew somehow, with complete certainty, I'm in Middle-earth, I whispered. I groped around in the dark until I found the book that Tarbin had thrown aside, and clutched it in my hands like a lifeline. I sat down on the ragged straw bed, staring numbly into the darkness. I didn't cry anymore. All my tears had gone. I straightened my shoulders, and in the dark, my hands steady on the book in my lap. Something was steeling itself inside me, the sheer force of it making my head spin. It pierced like swords and burned like cold iron. Oh boy, she's really beating the dead horse with this one, isn't she?
Yeah, she is.
I keep saying she. I should start saying they, because we don't know who the author is. But yeah, they're really beating the dead horse with the burn like cold iron puns. Or not puns, but mentions. And I knew then that no matter how, no matter what it took, I was going to find my way home. I didn't remember falling asleep. The fear, the grim resolve, the lightheadedness of knowing I was in Middle-earth all must have caught up to me at some point though, because I woke up to the pinkish light of dawn flooding my prison cell. I blinked owlishly. She uses some really weird adverbs in the light for a moment until I recognized.
No, I've noticed that before.
Yeah, there's some really she just takes a noun. Words. She just takes a noun and just places a Lee at the back, and it's like, oh, this is brilliant. Anyway, until I recognized the familiar thunk of the door unlocking. I sat up in a rush, suddenly wide awake. If Tarbin had returned, I had nothing to protect myself with now. Einar, is that you? I asked, crossing my fingers as the door swung open. But it wasn't Einar. It wasn't even Tarbin. My luck had never been that good. Get up. Saruman swept into the cell, and despite the ridiculousness of his clothes and beard and staff, I froze. He looked every inch a wizard. And if I'm really in Middle-earth, then he's really a wizard. He's a real, actual, honest-to-God... Now! The wizard snapped, and I scrabbled to my feet, pieces of straw sticking out of my tangled hair. What do you want? I asked, trying and failing to keep my voice even. If he was here to make me examine those horrible weapons of his down in his storerooms, the tank, the helicopter, the engines and military drones, I didn't think I could bear going down there again. One of my servants has just told me something very interesting, Saruman replied, a horrible obsessive glint in his black eyes. Oh, I said carefully. It was then that I noticed Harbin lurking behind Saruman in a corridor outside my cell. He smirked at me and I flinched. So he tattled on me somehow, had he? Indeed, the wizard smiled. I have been informed that you have something in your possession that is very valuable to me. Something I have been seeking for many years. A horrible feeling was growing in the pit of my stomach. Unable to stop myself, my eyes flickered back to rest on the threadbare mattress, where Nathan's copy of the Fellowship of the Ring still sat, torn, dirty, and covered in pieces of straw. Oh. Now, Beatrice, Saruman said, his voice low. It is time you gave me that book. Endnote. To clarify, the specific bit of music B plays is about 7.5 minutes into the third movement of Mahler's Resurrection Symphony. I highly recommend looking it up. Actually, listen to the whole thing if you have an hour and a half to spare. That part in particular leads to a very striking chord that is commonly referred to as, no joke, the Death Shriek. It's metal AF, and I like to think it would have scared. I like to think it would scare some medieval superstitious bozos out of their wits. What do y'all think? I'll try to have the next chapter out soon. Also, I have crippling anxiety about the quality of my stories. I mean, I hope you take a second to review. It means more than you think.
That's so cute.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice author. She's not calling me a prep, so that's a check in my book.
A fucking prep.
A fucking prep. Yeah, that's not happening. That's good.
And quick plug, go check out our episode about
yeah. Wow.
The story now.
Wow, Brendan, you're doing the self-adverbs. Look at that. Man, we might not even need advertisers.
Probably like what was it? Episode 1, episode 2?
Yeah.
It was one of our early episodes.
No. It's 1 and 2. You're correct.
Okay.
It was our first story. Was my Immortal to set the tone.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, my thoughts about this chapter. She cries again, which I don't like. She takes in my opinion, way too long to catch on, to even the most obvious of things, which is kind of annoying, but maybe that's just not a fault of the story. Maybe that's just me being annoyed at her. I guess I should always do the dialogue was really good thing.
Dialogue has always remained constant.
It's pretty great.
Yeah.
It's pretty great. I think maybe the author does a little bit too much of self-exposition or internal exposition where she's like, this happened inside of me, or I felt this, or I was feeling this, and if I was to do this, this would happen, a lot of things can be shown just by writing down the character's response to things and not just writing what the character thinks.
I think that's just a common trope in fanfiction, though.
Yeah, I think the self-insertion or the over-exaggeration of internal feelings and over-description is a big thing that is very common with fanfic.
I would know because I learned how to write mostly from fanfiction.
Yeah,
so.
Actually, I think it's pretty popular in most genre fiction too. I think it's only literary fiction, like literature, that does the whole very strict policy on not exposing or expositing that much information. I think it's only literature that does that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess I won't hold that against the story itself. I'll just hold it against the whole genre because I have many things that I hold against the whole genre. But yeah, chapter 7 is yours, Brandon.
Okay. Chapter 7.
Oh, actually, no. I didn't let you. Your thoughts. What were your thoughts?
I mean, my thoughts were basically the same as yours. I felt like the story is going in a really good place. I meant to say about the crying, I think I've realized that I think a lot of the times authors or writers tend to write their characters being emotional or whatever to kind of show a growth. I do think that there's going to be a time where she becomes more of a for lack of a better word, badass type character where she's...
I sure hope so. I cannot stand listening to her cry 3
I
times over
honestly think
chapter.
that's the arc. I know so much of these like fantasy shows, and I just consume so much media that I feel like I'm very familiar with all these like
Yeah.
archetypes and these story arcs.
I was gonna say it sounds like a Disney plot.
It is.
What this
It
what this
basically
sounds like.
is.
This sounds like Lord of the Rings 4, like made by Disney, of course.
Pretty much.
But
It's like a
yeah,
Disney Channel version, but yeah.
I think
alright,
you
well,
like.
I'll
I
get
think you
started.
like the story a lot more than I do, to be honest.
Well, we'll get into it. Let's
Yeah.
read this next chapter and we'll
Yeah,
get
yeah.
more
I'll
into
let you
it.
read now. I'm sorry.
Okay,
holding
no
you up.
problem, no problem. Chapter 7, spoiler alert. The book was in Saruman's hands before I could blink. Dimly, I realized I had grabbed it and held it out to him without a second thought, and I shook myself angrily. What are you doing, Bee? Focus. At last, Saruman said, the eagerness in his voice making me shudder. He held the book up to the light from my window, studying it closely. The Fellowship of the Ring. Wait, I said, trying unsuccessfully to force down my panic. How can you read it? It's in English. Saruman sent a withering glare in my direction, and I felt flush. Translation spell, of course, I surmised, wondering when such things had started to seem so normal. The wizard ignored me, admiring the book's thin pages and the neat, even print. I suppose for a world that didn't even have the printing press yet, the book was pretty remarkable. A fellowship, he mused, examining the cover and then flipping through the prologue. Interesting. Now come with me, Beatrice. What? Why? I demanded, even as I found myself slinging my violin case over my shoulder and heading out the cell door obediently. I shook my head again to clear it, but it was no use. I will not examine this book while standing in a prison cell, the wizard replied loftily, sweeping off down the hall. I followed reluctantly, glaring as I watched Tarbin skulk away down the hall in the opposite direction. Slimy scumbag! Thanks for ratting me out. Why? Why did you? What? Why do you need me then?
Take your
I
time,
asked the
Brandon.
wizard. I already told you. I don't know anything about those stupid books. Books? Saruman repeated sharply. There are more than one. I winced. Nice going, you idiot. There's 3, I said reluctantly. This is precisely why you are going to help me, girl. I underestimated you once, but it will not happen again. You clearly know a great deal more than you claim, even if you have not read the text itself. And if you refuse to aid me willingly, there are other ways of discerning your secrets. I swallowed with some difficulty, my limbs turning to lead as I walked. He didn't mean torture, did he? But I didn't know anything. How long are you going to keep me here? I managed. Saruman didn't spare me a glance, walking even faster now. I had to jog to keep up, my sandals slapping ominously against the stone floor. Honestly, I know that's what. I know that feeling.
That was me running to class.
For the rest of your days, perhaps, short as they may be, he said dismissively, as if there was no point in lying to me any longer. At the very least, until your usefulness has run its course. I stopped in my tracks. But you said, I stammered, you said you'd send me home if I helped you, down in the storerooms. You said, I bit back a panic sob. Please, can't you send me back? You have your precious book, just let me go. It is not simply a matter of letting you go, the wizard snapped. Such a spell is immensely difficult to create. It took me years of effort to bring you here. I'm not about to lay aside my other works merely to return a lost little girl to her homeland, especially for one as useful as you. No, Beatrice, you will not be going back. Oh, God. The hall seemed to spin suddenly. I snapped my eyes shut, willing myself to
Yeah,
calm.
you got this.
Yeah. willing myself to calm down without success. Sorry, I sometimes imagine.
No, I
words
think
aren't there.
I think we should tell our readers that I think you're reading on your phone, so it makes it a little bit harder, which is why you're doing the ums and stuff. So readers, don't blame Brandon. He's doing his best.
It had never occurred once. No, it had never once occurred to me. Excuse me. That I couldn't get home from here in Isengard. That the wizard would outright refuse what was I going to do. Beatrice, the wizard voice shook me out of my thoughts. Keep moving. No, no, please. Tears were welling in my eyes, despite myself. With immense difficulty, I moved my feet forward again, a wave of horror threatening to consume me. If my stomach hadn't been so painfully empty, I might have gotten sick in the middle of the hall. I followed the wizard numbly as we entered a room lined with high, narrow windows. Belatedly, I recognized it. The watery beams of light reflected off the thick dust in the air, exactly as they had several nights ago when I had appeared shaking and numb on the marble floor, clutching my empty violin case and wondering if this was all a dream. What are we doing here? I breathed. It seemed unnecessarily cruel somehow to take me back to the room I'd first arrived in when he was never going to send me home. And if Saruman can't get me home, then who possibly can? If he won't let me go, then I can't stay here. I just can't. Not a moment longer. Saruman ignored my question, stalking away to stand before a marble plinth in the center of the room. On top of the dice was a large orb, like a bowling ball. Saruman rested a clawed hand on it like a fortune teller and closed his eyes. I hadn't given the orb much notice when I'd first arrived, but now it drew my eye despite myself. As the wizard murmured under his breath, the orb began to swirl with white light under his hand. He held up Nathan's copy of The Lord of the Rings, and the light in the orb seemed to intensify, turning a fiery red. It was mesmerizing, horrifying. I couldn't tear my eyes away. And if some part of me had still doubted the existence of magic, well, now I believed wholeheartedly. There was nothing else it could be. Magic hung thick in the air around the orb. What had Saruman called it? The palindrome, whatever it was. I felt a strange, unpleasant prickle on the back of my neck as I looked at it, as though it was looking back at me, through me. I shuddered and forced my eyes away. Well, Saruman said, his deep voice jolting me out of my thoughts, it seems that this book is even more valuable than I had imagined. Oh, I said weakly, that's good. Yet you claim it is the first of the three.
Yeah, that
Tell me.
Maybe that's the author.
Yeah. It was the author this time. Tell me, what events are recounted in its sequels? I froze under the wizard's gaze, feeling the familiar forceful compulsion to speak, but not knowing quite what to say. I don't know what happens in the sequels. There's battles, I think, and horses. I cast my mind around desperately for anything Nathan might have told me. There's hobbits, elves, probably some sword fights, Orlando Bloom running around in a wig.
Bro, he's hot. I like Orlando Bloom.
I don't even know who he is.
You don't know who Orlando Bloom is? Have you never watched Pirates?
Katy Perry, but that's it.
You've never watched Pirates?
No, actually.
You've never watched Lord of the Rings, and you haven't watched Pirates.
No.
Okay, well, I guess you wouldn't know who Orlando Bloom is. He's Legolas. Oh, come on, Brandon. Just search him up after the podcast. I promise you.
I will. I cast my mind around desperately for. Oh, sorry, I read the same thing again.
Yeah.
My voice trailed off at the impatience of Saruman's face. I'm sorry, all right, I exclaimed, completely overwhelmed. I never read the books. I didn't even see the movies, like me.
Yeah.
I squeezed my eyes shut, thinking hard. Just let me get this straight, I clarified. So nothing in the books has happened yet. You tell me, Saruman snapped. It is the third age of Middle-earth, late in the summer of the year 3018. That doesn't mean anything to me, I cut him off, suddenly angry. God, I didn't understand anything here. Nathan would have been better suited for this than me. He knew those books inside and out and sideways, and would probably have weaseled his way back to Dallas by now, and stolen a new flat-screen TV from Saruman's storerooms for good measure. It matters not, Saruman said impatiently. He was leafing through the book's pages now, a hungry gleam back in his eyes, concerning hobbits. He muttered to himself, eyebrows furrowing dangerously. He seemed to have forgotten I was there. Why would such a text concern itself with hobbits? Unless, no, surely not. He began to flip through the pages with renewed fervor. And I swallowed. I may not have understood anything about this world, but I was pretty sure one of the main villains wasn't supposed to be reading ahead in his own story. What kind of horrible things could he do with that kind of knowledge? I shook myself angrily. Well, and what was I supposed to do about that? I wasn't even supposed to be here. It wasn't my business. The fate of Middle-earth, none of this was supposed to exist anyway. I was just some kid from Dallas. I had to focus on
Sorry
getting
about
home.
that.
But those thoughts weren't enough. Sorry?
That my phone is vibrating, and they probably could hear it on my mic, which is
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, keep going. I keep
But
interrupting.
those thoughts weren't enough to keep me from shuddering as Saruman read on. Bilbo Baggins and a Frodo Baggins. Halfling names. It must be true then. This is why the 9 ride for the Shire. My lord! Saruman snapped the book shut so violently that I jumped. Arnott stood in the doorway on the opposite side of the room, looking as pale and homeless as ever. His eyes flickered toward me.
She used that to describe him like a chapter beforehand.
Yeah.
So, is this his joke? Is this her joke? That Einar, every time he appears, she'll describe him as looking as pale and homeless as ever?
I'm pretty sure. Okay.
There's a lot of Easter eggs in this story.
There is. Now I lost my place.
His eyes flickered.
Thanks, Aaron.
Sorry.
Yes. Sorry,
no,
man.
I keep interrupting and I keep ruining it. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Einar stood in the doorway on the opposite side of the room, looking as pale and homeless as ever. His eyes flickered toward me in surprise, but I couldn't read his expression. What could possibly be so important that you disturb me here, you fool? Saruman spat, tucking the Fellowship of the Ring into a pocket of his robes. Forgive me, Einar bowed shakily, but a visitor has arrived to see you, my lord. A stranger swept into the room, thanking Einar in a quiet voice. The guard bowed again, looking quite petrified, but my eyes were fixed on Saruman's visitor. The man didn't cut a very impressive figure. He was stooped with age, his gray robes frayed and his beard windblown from travel. A patched, pointed gray hat was perched over his wizened face. But the stranger's eyes met mine as he walked forward, and I suddenly knew him. The man may as well have stepped directly out of a storybook. I knew who he was. It was really him. He looked the way I'd always imagined him when I was young. Gandalf? Both wizards turned to me in surprise. Have we met, child? Gandalf asked, raising a wild-looking eyebrow at me. I gulped, feeling rather starstruck. No. Gandalf the Grey. Saruman's voice rang out in greeting, cutting off my stammering. You have come to Isengard at last. Forgive me for not greeting you at my gates, my friend, he said genially. I have had a great deal on my mind of late. Gandalf gave a small bow. Think nothing of it, Saruman. Guard, the White Wizard snapped. He turned toward Einar, who nearly jumped out of his skin. Take the girl back to her rooms. I jumped as well. What? No, wait. But who is this old friend? Gandalf interjected, mildly turning his eyes on me. By her dress, she is no Dunlending, nor one of the Rohirrim. I looked down at myself, flustered, wondering how I must look in Gandalf's eyes. A bony, gawky girl in ripped blue jeans and a stained purple blouse. Bruises on my face and arms, and my hair hanging greasy and tangled around my shoulders. I'm sorry, I can't stop thinking about the way that the Harry Potter fanfiction writer used to describe their characters.
Oh no,
Anyways.
why would you mention that? No, now I'm thinking about it too.
I felt myself flush. No one of consequence, Saruman replied, and I glared up at him. Gandalf raised an eyebrow, which Saruman ignored. Go now, he snapped at Einar and me. The hour grows late, and there is much to discuss. I faltered as Einar beckoned me urgently from the doorway at the far side of the room. I just couldn't leave. How could I go back to that horrible cell now, when Gandalf was right there, the real, actual Gandalf? Possibly the only other person in this whole ridiculous world who could help me. Gandalf must have seen some of the helpless panic on my face, because he stepped forward suddenly and offered me his arm. Come, child. I will walk you to the door, he said kindly. Saruman shrugged impatiently and turned away. Surreptitiously picking up the Fellowship of the Ring again. Gandalf's steps were slow as we walked, and I wondered why he wanted to escort me across the room. It seemed a strange request to make, since the door wasn't far. Are you well, child? Gandalf's voice was low, and I raised an eyebrow. He clearly didn't want the other wizard to hear. I shrugged uncomfortably. Anyone could see that I wasn't well, but I didn't know how to reply without seeming rude. You seem to know me, Gandalf added. I nodded faintly. I'm a big fan, sir, I blurted out in a whisper before my nerves got the better of me. I'm afraid I don't understand you. I mean, I've read all about you, but I clarified. The Hobbit was one of my favorite books growing up. When I was 7, I used to wait on the front porch, hoping you'd walk by and invite me on an adventure. The Hobbit, Gandalf whispered, eyes narrowing. My dear girl, are you referring to... Yeah, I am, I interrupted. I didn't have much time now. We'd reached the door, and Saruman would interrupt us soon. Look, Saruman kidnapped me from far away, another world where Middle-earth is just a story. You have magic. Can you send me home? Gandalf frowned. He was silent for a moment. I do not know the nature of such magic, he said finally, his tone unreadable. I fear that may well be beyond me. I faltered. I could practically feel my last hopes shattering onto the marble floor at my feet. But if you can't get me home, my breath hitched, and I squeezed my eyes shut to calm myself. Look, at least just get that book away from Saruman then. Please, he's evil. Gandalf didn't answer, but his eyes narrowed suspiciously at me. We stood in the doorway now, Einar hovering near us, looking nervous and pale. I mean it. He's evil, I whispered quickly. He's collecting weapons from my world. He's trapped me here, and he's working with... Damn, I couldn't remember the name. He's working with the Eye, I finished in a desperate rush, hoping the wizard would understand my meaning. That's enough. Gandalf flinched and took a step back from me. Then, eyes wide, apparently he'd understood quite clearly. You could not say such things, child, he hissed. You could not know. It is impossible. But I shook my head, desperation making me stumble over my words. I saw it. The Eye. I mean, in the crystal ball. That palindrome thing. And it's in the movie. The story. I mean, you can't trust him. He's evil. That is enough, child, Gandalf insisted, releasing my arm and taking a step back. His voice held a careful pity, but there was suspicion in his eyes too. And I knew I was on my own. May you fly far from this place, and may fortune be kinder to you than it has been of late. But I must take my leave of you now. No! But before I could do anything, the door closed with an awful sense of finality. Gandalf was gone. Come, miss, Einar's voice reached as though from far away. I ignored him, pressing my ear to the door to listen to the wizard speak. I've acquired many objects from her strange world, and she is perhaps the crown jewel of my collection. Saruman's booming voice was reduced to a murmur through the heavy door. She is none of your concern, Gandalf. So your experiments have been successful. Truly. Gandalf's voice was barely audible. You're using the Palantir to do this. You think it's wise? Saruman laughed. Do not speak to me of wisdom, excuse me. Always you have feared such power, but why? There was a long pause in which I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat pounding against the door. Why should we fear to use it? They are not all accounted for, Gandalf exclaimed in reply. We do not know who else may be watching. Miss, I jumped as Einar touched my shoulder hesitantly. We must go. Wait, I said desperately. I needed to hear what they were saying. I didn't remember much from the movie, but I was pretty sure Saruman was going to attack Gandalf, and soon. I should have told Gandalf more, or would my clumsy warning be enough? He hadn't even believed me, had he? Miss, Einar hissed again. Please, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, it is said. But Gandalf's in trouble, I said helplessly. I don't know what to do. I don't remember, Einar. I don't remember what happens next. But there was nothing I could do except hope that my warning had been enough, and that Gandalf managed to get that book away from Saruman. My shoulders sagging, I allowed myself to be led down the hall. Einar looked relieved to put some distance between us and the wizards. But I didn't go far. I couldn't. I'm not going back to that cell, Einar. My feet had stopped moving, almost of their own accord. The guard hesitated, looking flustered. But miss, the white wizard said to take you to... No, I can't. I can't go back. I just can't. I'm not going to waste away in here when the story is going on outside and Starman won't send me home. I have to do something. I have to escape. I have to try. Miss, I don't understand, but I cannot let you. I'm sorry, Einar. I took a deep breath, turned, and marched off down an adjacent corridor, stunned by my own bravado. Einar had a sword strapped at his side, after all, and was a servant of Saruman, no matter how kind and timid he'd been with me. But I had to get out. I had to get home. And if no one in this tower was going to help me... Miss, wait! I whirled around, bracing myself for an attack, but instead found Einar frowning sheepishly, pointing at a corridor to my left. It is quicker to go that way, miss. For a moment, I was too stunned to move. Then, completely overwhelmed with emotion, I leapt forward and hugged him. The poor guard looked quite flustered and stepped back hurriedly, his face blotched with pink. Go on, Miss Beatrice Smith, Einar stammered. I will tell the wizard you cast the spell and escaped. I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. I knew, probably as well as he did, what might happen if Saruman didn't believe his excuse. But Einar met my eyes for the briefest of moments, and I hoped he saw the gratitude on my face before his gaze flickered back down to the ground. I took a deep breath and ran in the direction he pointed. My violin case swung wildly on my shoulder as I sprinted away, my sandals slapping on the stone floors as I flew down hall after hall, getting around corners and leaping down spiral staircases. I wasn't sure exactly how to get outside, but the grand entrance couldn't be too hard to find once I made it to the ground floor. My breath was coming in wild, heavy gasps, and it just wasn't from physical exertion. I couldn't believe that I was really doing this. I was defying a wizard. I was fleeing from my kidnapper. I was escaping. The tower was suspiciously empty, I realized. After I'd made it 10 or 12 floors down, I was bracing myself at each turn, expecting to see guards or soldiers waiting to apprehend me. But none appeared. Had Saruman sent all his servants away when Gandalf arrived? Or were they just all busy in those weird underground forges that I'd seen outside? It was the stone rooms I made for now. I didn't have a plan exactly. Or maybe I did. But it was so far-fetched and ludicrous that I couldn't even form the thoughts properly. Finally, I made it outdoors, laughing breathlessly as I felt a cool breeze on my face. The cool air in the summertime. How did I ever think that we were still in Texas? I quickened my pace, trying not to break into an outright run, which might look suspicious. Suddenly, I heard a faint rumbling coming from the tower. I turned back and saw a sharp flash of white light in one of the high windows. Was that Saruman? Was Gandalf in trouble? I walked faster, my hands shaking at my sides. The mountains seemed to loom down over me as I went along the path, and I felt giddy, sort of numbness flooding my mind. These mountains were in Middle-earth. There were wizards in the tower behind me. I had made it out and was going to escape from my kidnapper. But how? I swallowed. The vague plan in the back of my mind solidified suddenly into a concrete thought, and it was so ridiculous that I nearly laughed out loud. But now that I thought it out, it was impossible for the idea to go away. No, I told myself sternly. That's the most idiotic thing I've ever imagined. But what else should I do? I paused outside the door to the storerooms, digging through my violin case hurriedly. I had to organize my thoughts somehow, but I'd left my ballpoint pen in the prison cell, and besides, there wasn't really time for taking notes right now, was there? Okay, B, I muttered to myself, ducking into the storeroom hesitantly. I could hide in here until I came up with a plan. Mental notes. Think. What are your options? I could just run for it, I supplied, before shaking my head. Isengard was surrounded by that tall circular gate made of stone, and probably heavily guarded by Saruman's men. Besides, I had no idea where to go after that. I'd probably starve to death in the wild, even if I managed to get past the gates. Alright, steal a gun, and force your way out of the gates, was my next plan. But I swept that away immediately. I doubted I'd ever be able to stomach firing a gun, let alone shooting at someone. The thought made me feel sick. Fine, just steal a horse then. Well, that plan was better, certainly, but I didn't know where Saruman kept his horses, assuming he had some that were unguarded and in an unlocked stable. And there was still the problem of getting past the gates. I still need to force my way out with a gun. More importantly, I had no idea to ride. I may have been from Texas, but I was a city girl at heart, and I'd never been so much as ridden a pony at a petting zoo. Well then, I could just take one of the cars outside of the storeroom. Saruman had 4 cars sitting outside the building. 5 of you included the tank. But the Humvees were out of gas. The old station wagon was missing both front tires. The Prius and the Volkswagen had no keys, and I could no sooner drive a tank than sprout wings and fly. May you fly far from this place, Gandalf had told me, but there was nothing else I could do. I was out of ideas, except for my first thought, that half-formed plan, too ridiculous to even consider. A loud boom reached my ears from the tower, followed by a faint, furious shout. The sound echoed eerily off the mountaintops, and I stepped further into the storeroom nervously. Gandalf and Saruman were fighting. Of that I was sure now. And as much as I wanted to help Gandalf, there was nothing I could do for him anymore. I could hardly intervene in a magical duel. I would just make things worse. No, I had to get out of here while I could. Otherwise, I could spend the rest of my life helping Saruman wage war on innocent people, and I'd never get home. May you fly far from this place. The idea was a ridiculous one, yes, but I found myself clinging to it desperately. I had no other options, and after all, I was in Middle-earth now. Wizards were dueling on a tower behind me, mountains were from a fantasy novel were surrounding me, and suddenly my plan didn't seem that ridiculous at all, after all. And why not? I spent an entire night, feverish and frightened and exhausted, examining the machines in Saruman's collection. Unlike the other vehicles, this one had gasoline. Not a full tank, but enough to get me out of Isengard, certainly. It was unlocked, keys resting on the seat cushion, ready for use. It even had instruction manuals under the passenger seat, which Saruman had made me read out aloud by torchlight. It could work. I could do this. Arm yourself first. I reminded myself sharply, trying to think clearly. With any luck, I wouldn't be back here ever again, which meant I needed to take as much useful equipment for my world as I could. Hurriedly, I grabbed at parcels and electronics, stuffing my violin case with as much as I could fit. I went to the mountain of books next, seizing a few from an overflowing box and stuffing them into my arms. These rooms were filled with all I had left of my world. I clutched the armful of supplies to my chest, feeling oddly emotional. Then my eyes turned reluctantly to the wall on the far side of the room. Guns were mounted on it from floor to ceiling. Piles of ammunition and explosives strewn about the floor. I hesitated. Some of the electronics began to slip out of my hands as I studied the weapons. I was paralyzed with indecision. I hated guns. Hated them. It frightened me almost as much as my escape plan itself, but I knew it would be stupid to be lost somewhere in Middle-earth with no way to defend myself. I walked over and picked up a gun with a clammy hand. I didn't know what kind it was, some kind of pistol or other. I didn't know how to tell if it was loaded either, so I rifled through the cases of ammo until I found bullets that seemed to match the size and style of the barrel. Hopefully those would do. Feeling sick to my stomach, I slipped the gun into my violin case, and because I had never done anything by halves, I picked up an army green case of emergency flares, along with what looked like a Kevlar vest. Unable to stomach anymore, I carried my new treasures out the back door and toward the rows of vehicles behind the storerooms. I squinted back at the tower behind me, silhouetted against the bright sunlight. 2 tiny figures stood on the very top of Orthanc. As I watched, one of them slipped out of view, struck down, perhaps, or forced backward out of my line of vision. So far, the movie scene is coming true, then, I thought feverishly. I didn't stop them from fighting, or Gandalf from getting captured, but if I wanted to escape my own imprisonment, I had to hurry. This was it. There was no more stalling. If I didn't do it soon, I would lose the last shreds of courage I had. It would work if I acted quickly. It had to. I braced myself, took a deep breath, and opened the helicopter door.
Oh, baby.
Yep.
Oh, man. Yep. This is the chapter where it starts sounding like fanfic. I guess. You can present your thoughts, and I'll present mine.
Okay, so first, that was a lot to read. Let me just drink a little bit of water. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was a long chapter. That was an abnormally long chapter. Sorry I forced you through that.
No, it's totally fine. I was going a little while without even like gulping and just like swallowing my spit so I can continue reading.
Yeah. There are some long pauses in there, and I think we're all getting
Yeah.
spit in our throats right about
Yeah.
now.
I think okay. So I'm starting to understand a little bit of kind of the direction that the author is kind of going in. To me, I feel like this feels like one of those type of tropes we see in media oftentimes, where a character is put in like the past or whatever, or put in like the future, and they try not to like change any of the events that are going on in that timeline because they don't want to alter their timeline of their home reality. And while obviously this isn't like past future type situation, it's kind of a weird situation in the sense that like it's all like based on a book, and so I guess changing that could potentially change the book itself. And if that does happen, then what could happen to the main character? So I don't know. I think it's kind of an interesting plot that's been presented here. I think that we didn't really learn anything new outside of we met Gandalf, which is cool. But outside of that, we didn't really learn anything new. It's just her, I guess, trying to make her escape. I feel like I read that entire story and I still don't understand where the helicopter came from. So maybe you know where that came from.
No, it came
much
from. So last week we read a chapter where she just like when she was brought here, they like Saruman just like put a spell on her and forced her to read or like explain to him all of the vehicles in his collection, which actually I was going to talk about. But I mean, I want to let you finish your thoughts.
No, that was it. It was
okay.
basically just like, you know, I like the direction that the story is going. I kind of get the glimpse of what the author is trying to do.
I think maybe then we diverge here because I really don't like where this is going. I seriously hope that it's not just like, oh, there's like a sword fight and this girl just pulls out her pistol and just straight up like blasts everyone. Like I hope it doesn't go
to a sword fight.
Yeah. The entire thing ends with her like shooting Sauron in the face or something with her Glock. I mean, I sure hope that doesn't happen. But the whole like, oh, I can't touch a gun because it makes me sick. It's kind of like a ridiculous self-insert at this point because it's very, I mean, at least to me, it's pretty obvious that the author really does not like guns and is probably very anti-gun. You know, like you know, that kind of side of things. But like it's kind of ridiculous how like the aversion she has to something that is literally the simplest way to get out of there. Like straight up take a gun, shoot Saruman, leave. Like isn't that like every Resident Evil game ever?
Funny joke. I think the problem is that she doesn't really have anywhere to go because yeah, sure, she could shoot Saruman, but she needs to leave that reality. She's trying to get back to her home life, and that's in a different like planet.
Yeah, I also find the helicopter thing very ridiculous. Like you can't read the instruction manual to a helicopter and know how to fly a helicopter. You have to like have hours and hours of sim piloting or stuff like that.
Okay, but I thought that this was sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No. You go ahead.
But what was the significance of having like a Volkswagen and like Humvee?
Yeah, that was kind of like weird.
Isn't it Middle Earth? Like, isn't it supposed to be like not technology advanced?
No. It was Saruman. No, it was Saruman that summoned it. Yeah, she's in their storerooms. Yeah.
Got it.
No, I just find I find that ridiculous because I think you know, but our friend Caden, who is I was gonna invite as a guest sometime, but you know he's in Air Force. He's in the Air Force, and they need like hundreds of hours of like flying simulator practice before they even have the slightest inkling of how to operate like, you know, this kind of stuff like a helicopter or an airplane. So you can't read the instruction manual and fly it. First off, they don't come with instruction manuals unless they're civilian helicopters, and even then the instruction manuals are like very technical. Like this is how you adjust the fuel flow, and like this are the like temperatures that you have to keep the water in. Like it's that kind of stuff. It's not like pull the lever back and the plane goes up. It's not like that kind of instructions manual.
Right.
Which kind of
people go to school for that too. Like
yeah, exactly. It takes you hours, hours and hours and hours of actual flying class. Maybe I just find undue, but I feel like maybe she didn't research into this part of things. Also, why is she grabbing electronics equipment? Like, why wouldn't she grab things that might actually be useful? Like, it sounds like she's just grabbing TVs. Like, why would you do that? You know, you're trying to escape. I wouldn't grab anything. In fact, in this state, I would just grab one of the guns, some ammo. I wouldn't even check. I'd be so panicked. I'd just grab a gun and some ammo and run. And you know, I just find it kind of unbelievable that she's come up with this whole plot.
Yeah.
And is grabbing the things she's grabbing. I don't know.
I will say that there are some plot holes for me already, but like it's a fan fiction, so like I understand. Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more forgiving.
It's fanfic, yeah.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be too harsh, but anyway, I'm gonna go on to chapter 8.
And this is, I think, are going to be our last.
Yeah, exactly. We're at 1 hour 15. Yeah. That's why. So chapter 8, and then we'll go on to chapter 9 next episode. Chapter 8 is called "What Goes Up." Let me take a drink. I will begin to describe how our main character learns how to fly a helicopter in 10 minutes. Chapter 8, What Goes Up? This was going to be more difficult than I thought. And that was saying a great deal because my whole body was already shaking with the sheer impossibility of what I was about to do. So much so that I nearly stumbled over my own feet just loading the supplies I'd stolen from Saruman's stores into the helicopter. There was more room for the stolen goods than I thought there'd be in the backseat of the vehicle. Camping gear was strewn on the floor, left in disarray by their previous owner. Some wealthy adventurer used to own all this, I suppose. They probably took their friends or family out skydiving and camping in the mountains and were baffled when their helicopter and gear went missing one day. They could never imagine that it had ended up in Middle Earth. Poor thing, bless their heart, I muttered out loud. Yes, the appropriate response. But I couldn't afford to think about that right now. I climbed into the pilot's seat and slammed the door shut decisively. Closed inside the tiny egg-shaped cockpit, I nearly lost my nerve then and there. My eyes darted back and forth across the helicopter's dashboard, panic swelling in my chest. There were so many buttons and dials, a joystick and pedals and levers, and a weird sci-fi throttle, and how did I ever think I could do this? Maybe stealing a gun and taking off on foot would have been easier, but I knew I couldn't shoot at anyone. Why not, I can't imagine. And I knew Saruman would catch me not 5 miles out of Isengard if I even made it that far. No, it was too late to turn back now. It took me a long moment to even find the ignition on the dashboard. My hands shook so badly it took even longer to actually stick the key in and turn it. I flicked through the heavy instruction manual as lights sprang to life behind some of the dials and screens. Thankfully, there was a labeled diagram on one of the pages, and I slowly started to make sense of all the controls. The lever on my left was the collective, the joystick thing in front of me was the cyclic, the yaw pedals were at my feet. Having names for all the gears helped me calm down, creating some order out of chaos. I made a list in my head, committing the diagram to memory as I read through their functions. Maybe I could do this. I buckled my seatbelt and buckled my violin case into the passenger seat for good measure, feeling oddly protective of it. This whole thing is ridiculous. Now it was time to test the throttle. Keeping my eyes on the manual, I reached for the lever, braced myself, and the blades whirred to life above me. "Ha ha!" I exclaimed breathlessly. "Ha ha! Yes!" Yeah, very mechanic. Sorry about that. Hell, maybe I could really do this. The helicopter was ridiculously loud, almost loud enough to drown out my thundering heartbeat, and the rotors stirred up a cloud of dirt in the air. I released the throttle hastily, letting the rotors die back down. I pored over the instruction manual one more time. I had already read aloud some of the basic flight instructions at Saruman's bidding, that first night in Isengard. He had been stunned by the concept of a flying machine. A great mechanical bird, he'd said, and I'd let out a derisive laugh before quailing at the look in his eye. I've learned not to laugh at Saruman. I knew now just what he was capable of and who he really was. And yet here you are, trying to escape from him with a piece of equipment you've never even set foot in before. I swallowed with difficulty. Hell, back home people took lessons, got pilot's license, worked for years and years to fly one of these things. And here I was like a complete idiot, trying to do the same, just like that. God, what was I thinking? A panic sob escaped me, and I was suddenly overwhelmed. I felt faint. The world seemed to spin beneath the pilot's seat. I couldn't do it. Why I'd even got into the helicopter was baffling. But I had to try, didn't I? Saruman was never going to send me home, but there had to be someone else there who could. This world was full of magic after all, wasn't it? I saw my mom's face clear in my mind, the faces of my friends and coworkers. I saw my old run-down apartment, the lime green couch and chipped paint on the walls. Tears welled in my eyes. Oh, brother. Here we go again, guys. I reached for the throttle again. This time the blades were even louder. I let them speed up and up and up until the engine behind me roared and my stomach flipped upside down and the helicopter's heavy egg-shaped body lifted off of the ground. I did it. I was flying. The helicopter climbed into the air, its nose dipping slightly as it drifted forward, narrowly missing the roof of the storerooms. The rotor spun faster and louder than ever. My head reeled and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Oh my God, oh my... I swallowed nervously. I was going to crash into something at any moment, I just knew it. But I hadn't run into anything yet, had I? I hadn't made the engine explode. I hadn't fallen out of the sky. Those were good signs, right? I let out a nervous, giddy laugh, frightened by my own success. The helicopter veered around the storeroom lazily, leaving it further and further below me. It was a good thing I'd never been very afraid of heights. My stomach lurched as the wind buffeted the helicopter back and forth, and I strained to steady the throttle unsuccessfully. I knew that if this was a pilot's exam, I would have already failed. I was pretty sure helicopters were supposed to hover into the air when they took off, not lurch forward uncontrollably. But I had no idea how to get the damn thing to stay put, which meant I was drifting forward, arcing sharply to the side as I rose, the top of Orthanc growing closer and closer. The wide flat roof of the tower rose up to meet me on my left side. I gulped. The wizards were there, just as they'd been in the movie, only now they weren't fighting one another anymore. Gandalf had been knocked back to the very edge of the tower, and even from my far-off vantage point I could see the blood on his temple. My heart twisted painfully in my chest. He wasn't moving. Get up! Fight back, I thought desperately, before realizing he was staring in utter shock in my direction. Saruman, too, had stopped advancing on the other wizard, and was gazing at the helicopter's ungraceful ascent into the air. What it must be like, I wondered suddenly, to live in a medieval world, magic or no, and suddenly see a modern helicopter in flight. Then Saruman raised his staff towards me, and I decided I didn't want to stick around to find out. It was time to move faster, to leave this place behind me. I jerked one of the controls forward decisively. Decisively? She keeps using that adverb, and I'm not sure if it's right. Then screamed as the helicopter...
She definitely has not used it correctly.
Then screamed Then screamed as the helicopter nosedived violently and began plummeting back to Earth. No, stop! I pulled back in the opposite direction as hard as I could and leveled out 50 feet or so from the ground. The tail careened drunkenly for a few moments, and I forced the bile that had risen in my throat, shaking uncontrollably. Holy crap, I breathed hoarsely. Holy crap! Still swaying this way and that on the wind, I struggled to flip through the instruction manual. Wait, so who's flying? While keeping an eye on the controls. No, the violin case is flying. I was drifting upward again, gaining speed and altitude as the throttle pushed the blades faster and faster above my head. I was nearly level with Orthanc again. Oh, that's what I did wrong, I realized as I read over the diagram. Oops. This was even tougher than it looked. I had to move multiple levers at once to control my acceleration, it looked like, and then move them in different directions. I set aside the manual and nudged the joystick forward again, ever so gently, at the same time pulling at a lever on my left. Yes, I was moving forward properly now. Any second I'd be past the wizards and on my way. A deep chanting voice made me pause. My hands faltered on the controls, reducing my speed as I looked down. The voice sent a chill down my spine, and it was clearly audible even over the rotors. It was the same voice I'd heard in my apartment 1,000 lifetimes ago when my friends gathered around me asking if I was okay, telling me they'd see me soon. It was Saruman's voice, and he was casting a spell. Suddenly, I noticed the clouds gathering above the tower. Where had they come from? They were solidifying and darkening as I watched, and were rotating slowly above me, as though mimicking the helicopter's blades. Great, I said faintly, fumbling at the controls with shaking hands. Now he can control the weather, too? The entire helicopter swayed suddenly as the wind picked up, and it began to spin like a top in midair, even as I began to lose altitude again. No. I slammed a foot down on one of the yaw pedals, but that only made it spin faster. Damn it, wrong pedal! Fumbling with the controls and pedals, I finally guided the tail back in the proper direction, my entire head spinning until my stomach couldn't take it anymore and I dry heaved, pressing my forehead against the controls as I retched and gasped for breath. For once I was glad I hadn't eaten anything that day, though it didn't make my stomach feel any better. I managed to right the tail from spinning, but the wind had grown so strong at the wizard's command that now it was pulling the helicopter in a swerving, faltering circle around the tower. I pushed the controls to move forward again, properly this time, but only succeeded in spinning faster around the tower. The wind was too strong for the helicopter to break free. "Come on," I pleaded, my voice lost in the gale, but the helicopter continued to veer around the tower once, twice. I looked down in panic to see Saruman lower his outstretched arms and point his staff at the careening helicopter. A reddish light appeared at the end of his staff, forming a sort of gleaming fireball. What was he doing? Boom! A searing heat exploded near my face, and the helicopter pitched to the side so violently I thought it might roll over entirely. Broken glass stung at my skin, and my scream was swallowed up by a howl of wind. Freezing air shattered through the helicopter, sucking the breath from my lungs until stars danced behind my eyes. I screamed again as the helicopter began losing altitude, screamed and screamed until I was struggling to breathe. Desperately, I fumbled at the controls with frozen hands, and I finally looked to my left to see what Saruman had done, and there was a hole in the door. I couldn't believe it. There was a goddamn gaping hole in the helicopter door. Yes, you've stated it before. There is indeed a hole in this door. Saruman's attack had shattered the glass and twisted the metal under the window, leaving a horrible burning smell in the cockpit that even the howling wind couldn't get rid of. "Oh, come on!" I screamed in absolute desperation as the helicopter leveled off, still being pulled involuntarily around the tower in the wind. I gasped for breath as it careened from side to side like a sailboat in a hurricane. "Come on! You threw a fireball at me?" Caught in the magical wind hurling me around the tower, I risked a glance down at the wizard, and bit back another scream as a second ball of fire narrowly missed me. It flew wildly off in the distance, only just missing the rotor spinning above me before disappearing into the rolling black clouds overhead. "Damn it!" I yelled, my voice cracking with hysteria. "None of this was in the movie!" Yeah, that would probably be my reaction too.
Same, if I saw the movie.
I tried to escape the magical gale Saruman had conjured, pulling at the lever on my left and pushing the control in front of me forward, but the wind was too strong. The rotors strained with the effort, and an unpleasant groaning sound came from the engine behind me. In a panic, I looked down at the tower one last time and was relieved to see that Gandalf had gotten to his feet. I let out a grateful sigh. At least he was okay, for now anyway, though his staff was nowhere to be seen. Gandalf stepped forward slowly. It looked like he was yelling something at Saruman. The White Wizard paused in his attack on my helicopter to face him. The wind around the tower faltered ever so slightly. I breathed in sharply. Gandalf was distracting him on purpose. This was my chance. "Now!" I screamed, pulling at the controls again, and this time the helicopter broke free of the gale, miraculously. Deus Ex style. The helicopter tore off into the sky as fast as I dared to go. My hands shook on the controls, but I was moving steadily now. At least steadily enough that I didn't immediately fear for my life. The helicopter was flying over the grounds, the underground pits, the orchards. Orchards? Yeah, that's how you pronounce that word. The long dirt road leading away, and finally, the circular gate at the edge of Isengard. I took a shuddering breath, hardly able to believe it. I escaped. I did it. I was free. I should have stolen the tank. This was by far the most difficult, terrifying, ridiculous thing I'd ever done. And I had no idea that piloting a helicopter could be so loud. The spinning of the blades made a wild roar around the helicopter, and the freezing wind ripped through the hole in the door and into my hair as I flew, threatening to burst my eardrums and making my face and fingers numb with cold. Even louder than all that was my thundering heartbeat, which hadn't slowed down since the moment I'd taken off. It was pounding through my skull, making me dizzy, although from fear or excitement I couldn't tell. The helicopter lurched violently as a freezing current of air slammed into the rotors. Scrabbling at the controls, I managed to slow my downward descent and worked at the yaw pedals until the tail stopped spinning. Maybe it had been a stupid thought, but I had assumed that once I was out in the open and all I had to do was fly in a straight line, things would get easier. They hadn't. Gusts of wind were constantly buffeting the helicopter up and down without warning, and every now and again the tail would veer alarmingly to the left or right, seemingly without cause. My hands were numb on the controls as I constantly tried to adjust the rotors, tail, and throttle. I knew if anyone from my world looked up and saw a helicopter flying like this, they'd assume the pilot was blackout drunk. I still couldn't get a proper hang of the controls either, though at least I hadn't hit anything yet. That had to count for something. There were a few near misses though as I cleared the steep hills surrounding Saruman's tower. The wind had risen up angrily around me, and I nearly crashed into a canopy of trees as a particularly violent gust of wind sent the helicopter's nose plummeting downward. The black storm clouds from Saruman's spell followed me miles and miles from the tower, making the wind even wilder. It took nearly a half hour of flying as fast as I dared before I lost the storm clouds in the distance where the rolling hills of forest had swallowed up Saruman's tower. Finally, all traces of Isengard and Saruman were left behind. I tried to breathe a sigh of relief, but my breath hitched in my lungs. I knew I wasn't in the clear yet. After all, I was lost. I squinted ahead, looking for signs of civilization on the ground below me. The hills had given way to mountains in the distance to my right, and below me they were thinning gradually into rocky, rolling plains. There were no signs of life whatsoever. Should I just keep flying straight until I run out of fuel? Or try to land now and take my chances? There has to be some civilization. My thoughts flew out of my head as a strong current of air slammed against the pilot's window, cracking the glass further and sending the entire helicopter careening sideways. I leapt at the controls, and after a long moment of cursing and lever pulling, the rotors angling up and down, the nose bobbing and tail swerving, the helicopter righted itself again. "Will you stop doing that?" I hissed at the dashboard venomously. Honestly, if only I had Nathan's book, I thought, or more specifically, the map Tarbin had ripped out. Then I might have been able to find a destination, but I didn't have the map. I didn't even know how to land, and I was in the middle of nowhere. So stopping now wasn't an option. But what then? Where could I go? The world spread out below me, unending and empty and strange. Oh my god, I breathed faintly. I'm lost in a helicopter in Middle-earth. Oh my god. My vision blurred as panic threatened to overwhelm me. What do I do now? Go back? He thought. No good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward? Only thing to do. On we go. The words came to me quite suddenly, and I found myself smiling despite myself. My panic cooled slightly. I was able to breathe again. The words were from my old favorite book, The Hobbit. I remember reading them as a little kid, my hands nearly tearing at the pages in concern, as Bilbo struggled to find his way out of the caves under Goblin Town. Admittedly, being lost in a helicopter was a pretty strange comparison to make, but still, the words came back to me nonetheless, and my hands steadied themselves on the helicopter's controls. Only thing to do, I repeated out loud. On we go. So how long is this chapter, exactly? I think maybe this is the last section. Maybe this episode is running a little bit over, huh? I wasn't sure how much time was passing. My phone, of course, was long dead, and despite the sheer number of dials and buttons on the helicopter's dashboard, there was no sign of a clock. So I continued onward, every few minutes leaping to correct the helicopter's flight whenever the wind changed or an unexpected gust hit the rotors above me. There was no sign of civilization. If I was living in Middle-earth, I decided I'd live near the mountains. Snow melt for water and whatnot, right? With this vaguely in mind, I drifted closer to the mountain range on my right, though I still kept them at a good distance. It seemed like the wind got wilder and less predictable when I flew too close to the mountains. Did that have something to do with the change in altitude? The air temperature, maybe? I wish I'd taken a meteorology course in college. It might have helped me now. Hell, I wish I had taken flight lessons most of all. But no, my mom had to insist on a business degree, I thought bitterly. Although admittedly my desired major, violin performance, wouldn't have been very helpful in this situation either. The sun crept forward in the sky. The tiny meter on the fuel gauge drifted lower and lower as I went. How far had I gone? And how far could I keep flying? The manual said on a full tank the helicopter could make it nearly 350 miles, but the tank hadn't been full when I set out, and I imagined that a hole being ripped in the helicopter door didn't exactly work wonders for the gas mileage. Besides, I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this up. I was hungry, cold, thirsty beyond relief, desperately tired, and getting whinier by the minute. Come on, Middle-earth, I complained, trying not to notice how the clouds looked like mashed potatoes, the river in the distance looked like gravy, and the trees below me looked like steamed broccoli. I'm starving. Let me find some civilization. I'll take anything. Still, there was nothing, as far as the eye could see. I itched to go faster, rocketing through the air until I found a city, a town, even a single farmhouse, but I knew I shouldn't push my luck. As the day wore on, I slowed down bit by bit until I was going barely 50 miles an hour. Slow for a helicopter, or I assumed so by how high the speedometer allowed. But I wanted to be careful. The vehicle was lurching and veering worse than ever, and I began to wonder if Saruman's magical gale and the hole in the door were beginning to take their toll on the poor helicopter. Maybe it was because I was well and truly running out of fuel now, and the helicopter was on its last legs. Or maybe it was all in my head, my weariness making me jumpy, and my coordination worse than ever. I jumped as a shrill beeping filled the cockpit. I was running out of gas. Well, I told myself faintly, struggling to stay calm. You're lost anyway, aren't you? So this place is as good as anywhere. But I still didn't know how to land. I slowed down even more as I reached for the instruction manual. All you have to do is figure out how to hover, I said reassuringly, and then descend until you hit the ground, right? Suddenly, the rotors faltered. The helicopter jolted violently, and the manual fell out of my hands, swept into the back seat by the wind. No, come on, stop falling! I pulled at the throttle desperately, and the rotors sprang back to life, though not as fast as before. The engine made an unpleasant groan behind me. I was losing altitude. I slowed down again, trying desperately to stop the helicopter from moving forward as the ground got closer. Just hover, damn it, come on! How did pilots do it? It was impossible. That didn't keep me from trying, though. I pulled forward and back on the levers, angled the failing rotors this way and that, and only succeeded in pitching the helicopter forward and back so violently that my head started spinning. If anything, that made my descent even faster. There was no hope for it. I was going to crash. Feverishly, I pulled my seatbelt tighter as the ground came rushing up to swallow me. I squeezed my eyes shut. Crash. I screamed as the helicopter's runners tore through the earth, jerking my body against the seatbelt so hard my head slammed into the dashboard and my vision flashed red. Rock and mud exploded violently across the windshield, cracking the glass. The helicopter's nose pitched forward and to the right, its body tilting to the side and the rotors tearing into the ground as they struggled to continue spinning. I held the controls in a death grip as the helicopter plowed forward, further and further, losing speed until it finally careened to the right, fell over on its side, and came to a shuddering halt. It took me a minute or two longer to stop screaming. I pried my hands off the controls, struggled out of my seatbelt, and fell limply onto the passenger's seat below me. With enormous effort, I stood and wrenched open the pilot's door, which was now above my head. A shower of broken glass from the window fell into my face, and I winced and sputtered, pausing to shake the larger pieces from my hair. Climbing out of the helicopter took the better part of 10 minutes. Finally, I managed to hoist myself out of the ruined door, where I tumbled onto the grass, breathing heavily as though I had just run a marathon. You did it! My stomach heaved and my head spun, and I clutched at the grass with both hands, grateful beyond words to be back on solid ground. After a moment, I tried to stand up. The world spun beneath me and I fell back into the grass. And for the second time in my life, I passed out. Cool. So I guess I'll do my analysis, real quick, and then I'll let Brandon do his, and then we can end it off with a quick outro. So, this is absolutely unbelievable. First off, I don't know if you know this, Brandon, but most pilots, they start out flying fixed wing, so like, airplanes, and for a few years, and then it takes them a few years to do helicopter training. So effectively, what Beatrice, what's her name? Beatrice Smith? Is that her last name?
I don't know, Beatrice something.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
B effectively does dozens of years of preparation, of pilot training, with a hole, no less, punched into the side of this helicopter. No doubt ripping a hole in the fuel tank and disabling a lot of important features that are present in a helicopter. So even when you start flying a helicopter, they choose a perfect day to go out and do your first hover. And Beatrice here has learned from an instruction manual in 10 minutes after running out of being tortured by Saruman, and figures out how to pilot a heavily damaged helicopter through rough ruins and running out of fuel without any computer assistance, basically. And that is just not okay. Maybe I'm being too technical, but like even at this point, I feel like even to someone who doesn't like do airplanes as their major, even then, that seems a little bit much. Also, she cries too much and says, "Oh my God," way too many times. I feel like you don't have to write down every time she says, "Oh my God," under her breath, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of funny to me. The whole she flies the helicopter past Gandalf, because I'm imagining, because I've seen the movie, I'm imagining the shot in the movie where it's like a big pan around. It'd be really funny if it was just panning around. There's just a helicopter coming out of nowhere.
Right.
It's I don't know. Maybe it's too ridiculous for me to appreciate it. I think maybe the author's going a little bit too much into the whole thing.
Okay, so wait, are you done with your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's a little bit kind of nonsensical to believe that someone with no knowledge of how to fly planes at all would suddenly be able to operate a helicopter. I feel like they spent a lot of time on just this helicopter, which made it kind of boring to watch.
Yeah, it felt tedious.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
Very tedious. So that was kind of annoying. But aside from that, I mean, I think overall, it was a pretty blah chapter. I think we just needed to get through this to kind of explain, okay, her kind of getting away and all that kind of stuff. And then hopefully next chapter is gonna open up a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm super sorry for whatever that clacking was. I don't know if you heard it in the background.
I didn't hear it. No.
Okay, good. My microphone is good enough to cancel that out then.
Got it.
But this is The Pen is Mightier, and we will be back shortly with Chapter 9. See you, everyone. Bye.
See you. Bye.